Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for January 3rd, 2013. Welcome to the new year. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Welcome, and joining us today we have John Hogeboom and Jim Clausing. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad. I thought we'd start out today with basically an update on the denial of service attacks against financial institutions as are continuing. There has been some propaganda on that topic. And along those lines, I wanted to try to level set some of that propaganda. I'm showing one particular article here. This is just one in particular. And I think one of the troubles is there aren't really good sources of a lot of information about what is actually going on with these attacks. This article, in fact, puts together some pieces and parts of what things have been available in the media. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that these attackers are trying to create sort of a perception impact. So it's not just the denial of service attacks themselves. They're trying to change our perception or influence our perception of how reliable these financial banking websites are. And so what they've been doing, for example, is putting postings on websites. They have a blog site where they basically are claiming victory at denial of service attacks against particular websites. But for most part, what they're doing is taking a particular really short period of time where, yes, there has been a little bit of impact and the mitigation activities have been adjusting a little bit and taking a snapshot where the site isn't as reliable as it normally would be and using that to basically say that they've been successful at attacking that website. The fact of the matter is there have been very short disruptions, and these institutions have disclosed that fact. One of the things they did yesterday, in fact, was, this is speculation for the most part, but they noted a site, it's called sitedown.co. This is a website of the country of Colombia that basically is a place to report downed websites. And strangely enough, a number of postings were made that, I can't get to this website, I can't get to the other website. And I think it was really, most of those postings were probably fabricated. They probably weren't real at all. So we wanted to at least just give you a little bit of an update on the activity. Yes, the attacks are continuing, but for the most part, business continuity is strong with all of these organizations that are under attack, and a lot of what is getting out in the media is basically a matter of perception. It's not a matter of actual reliability or security of those sites. So I guess in summation here, I think this particular article gives the attackers a little more credit than they deserve. They haven't been that particularly effective with their attacks. I don't know, what do you guys think? Jim or John, do you have any additional thoughts on this? Well,
we've been looking at these attacks, and I would agree with you that most of the information that's been coming out about the attacks is from the attackers themselves, and it's highly unreliable. Like you said, from what I'm seeing, they'll attack for very small windows of time, of maybe 15 minutes, and during that 15 minutes, that's when they do their testing with sites like sitedown.co or there's a few others, and then they'll post screenshots that the site was down at that time. But that's not necessarily a good indication of any kind of successfulness, in my opinion, because they do it right when the attack starts, as opposed to any kind of sustained type of attack activity. So, like you said, the business continuity of these banking websites has been maintained. They're not offline for any extended period of time, more than a few minutes that we've been able to see. And the attackers are trying to just capitalize on very small windows of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So in any case, I hope this helps to clarify things a little bit. And, I did see an article that I read recently that referred to basically 5 essentials of DDoS mitigation, and perhaps we'll bring that up in the next program to talk about in a little more detail. I think there were some good points they were making. Among those was this notion of basically, doing the mitigation transparently, which for the most part organizations have been doing, But when you have small disruptions like that, and social media manipulation that are going on by the attackers, that's one of the things that is difficult for organizations to manage and manage the truth and perception versus the perception that the attackers are trying to convey. So with that, let me transfer it over to, I think, John, you were going to introduce this discussion on the water hole attack, and I think this is a kind of a thing that's sort of been around for a while, but I guess I understand there's some new twists to it.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. So there was let me bring up the slide here real quick. There was a posting from the guys at FireEye, who are security experts. They also have products and services that they provide. One of the things that they picked up on is that there was a watering hole attack on the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations is kind of a government-type think tank, security policy stuff on how we interact with other foreign countries and things like that. So the concept of a watering hole is kind of different than, we've talked about targeted attacks. And I should mention that this is a targeted attack. They're trying to compromise victims that might be visiting the Council on Foreign Relations either because they work there or they do business with them. So a watering hole attack is exactly that. So much like in the Sahara, a lion might stake out a watering hole. Instead of trying to go through the jungle or whatever, trying to find prey, it will wait near where it knows that prey is going to show up, and that's a watering hole because eventually they need water, and then attack. So it's a similar kind of tactic here where the attacker, he will plant some type of vulnerability on a vulnerable website. In this case, what they did is they were able to compromise the website up at the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR.org, and place some rogue JavaScript and additional things in there, which we'll talk about. And it uses a zero-day IE exploit. And I think Jim might have some more information on that as well. Once that exploit was dropped, basically they just kind of sit and wait. They might have actually sent some spearfishes out. I don't have any indication if that was the case to lure people in, but they don't even need to in this case. They can kind of just wait for the victims, random people that might be frequently browsing to the CFR.org website. Once they do, they get compromised, and then the attacker can either keep and use those victims for whatever intelligence gathering they want to do, or discard them. This particular attack, as far as we know, and from FireEye's analysis, what they know, it was estimated that it was only around from about December 21st through the 26th, maybe a little bit later than the 26th, I'm not sure. But that's roughly the time frame that the website was vulnerable and had this malicious code deployed on it. The way that worked is if a browser browsed to it, if someone browsed to the website, they would hit some JavaScript that was implanted on there. That JavaScript loads a malicious shockwave flash object. And what that did is it triggered a heap spray attack on IE, which is being dubbed it's a zero-day attack called the Microsoft Internet Explorer CDWN bind info use after free remote code execution vulnerability. Microsoft released a security advisory on this, 2794220, and there's also a common vulnerability exploit number on this one as well that you can go reference. So a couple of things about this. This is not a new thing. We've seen watering hole attacks before. Whether you should be worried that you might be compromised by this, I would say only if you or people in your business frequently go to the Council on Foreign Relations website would I be concerned, especially during that time frame. If you have proxy logs or web logs for your enterprise, you might want to go back and look to see if anybody even actually went there during that time frame. That might be a first indicator or something to even be worried about. But in general, I don't know that I would, it's such a targeted attack, I'm not quite sure that I would be worried in a en masse kind of situation unless it applies to your business. Mm-hmm. The other thing is this type of attack, we've talked in the past about general malware sites, that where they'll find lots of vulnerable websites out there on the internet, and they'll drop payloads on there of, exploit code, and then they lure people in there, usually through emails and whatnot, to go there. This happens all the time. It's a very similar kind of thing, but in this case, instead of a junky, cruddy, unmaintained website out there that's been compromised, this is, a more mainstream website that's been compromised specifically for this targeted type of attack. So, it's two kinds of sides of the coin there where, you've got malware, general malware uses similar tactics on really cruddy websites, and in this case, it's a very sophisticated attacker using the same tactic on what should have been a secure website, or more secure website than some of these other ones we've seen in the past. So I don't know, Jim, did you have any more info on the actual vulnerability itself that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, just a little bit. There was actually a threat post article yesterday, and I'm not sure, we'll get the link on there, that this, basically the same attack also they had also infected another energy manufacturer exploiting the same vulnerability, and there's a Metasploit module now to exploit this vulnerability. So it is one that is now relatively easy to exploit if the bad guys want to plant this elsewhere, drop it in. My big fear is always, somebody dropping it on an ad server someplace that gets served up on a bunch of websites that are hosting the ads.
All right, it could become sort of a mass infection issue if that were to occur. I mean, so if I understand correctly, it's basically available in the public domain, even though it was a 0-day just a little while ago, right? Yeah,
in less than in just a couple of days, it went from being a 0-day to having a Metasploit module available for it, which makes it relatively easy for lots of bad guys to incorporate this into their toolkits.
Right.
The vulnerability itself is a use after free. Basically, it's a relatively common coding error where they managed to get the infected application, in this case IE, to access a chunk of memory that it has previously used and thought it wasn't going to use again and threw away. Mm-hmm. And then it bypasses a couple of standard defensive mechanisms. It can bypass ASLR, address space layout randomization, can bypass DEP, the data execution protection. There's actually a nice guest post yesterday on the Internet Storm Center by T.J. O'Connor that talks about using one of Microsoft's own tools, what is it called? The Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, which Microsoft is talking about for a while. They released it in beta. It's not quite a final release yet. That can detect some of these attempts to bypass ASLR and DEP and the heap spraying kinds of attacks. And when it detects these kinds of things, it'll just gracefully kill the process that's trying to do it. But, these are the same kinds of techniques have been used in other attacks in the past. You'll see them used again in the future. Mm-hmm. Microsoft did release, I think on New Year's Day, a fix-it for IE that is that you can install that basically patches a DLL that if the attempt to call this, it'll return a null instead of actually branching into the malicious code that's been sprayed onto the heap. It's kind of a temporary fix, and I assume that it may not happen this patch Tuesday, but I'm certain by next patch Tuesday we'll have an update to IE to fix this in the cases where for IE versions that are still under support. The thing to note is this only affected IE 6 through 8, and those are all primarily run on XP. If you're running Windows 7, you're most likely on 9 or 10. 9 or 10 weren't affected by this vulnerability, although you could occasionally see the side effect of it. I think it was in one of the Microsoft, in the Microsoft article, they're talking about you may actually see a window pop up where it's attempting to do a get %E0, %B4. Basically you'd see an attempt to open this bogus thing as if it were a URL, an HTML page someplace that it was trying to get. But IE 9 and 10 are not affected. So far, the penetration that we've seen, it's only been a couple of targeted websites that have had the exploit on them. But as I said, it's a Metasploit module now, so it's out there for the bad guys to start incorporating into their toolkits.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But one other thing I wanted to just chime in about is they believe this threat is state-sponsored via China. China has a lot of experience. Actually, most of the zero-day exploits come out of there. And I also wanted to mention that I want to say maybe back in October, November timeframe, there was another IE zero-day exploit. I think it was IE that we also saw used by the same types of threat actors for very targeted APT-like attacks before a patch was released. So it looks like, these guys are able to make zero-day exploits or find them and turn them into actual, leverage them into actual exploits before most of the world gets them, like, has now happened with Metasploit. So hopefully Microsoft will get a patch out quickly to now that it's more widespread. Right. But even when it's not, it's kind of troubling that, these types of exploits can be used by these threat actors where they have kind of a little secret sauce that they can hold on to for maybe a week or something in advance and use it before the whole world knows about it.
Well, the other thing is, if there wasn't motivation before, and I think there should have been, because Microsoft has been saying for a long time they're going to stop supporting XP. Get off XP and onto Windows 7. Get onto the newer versions. Mm-hmm. It's the old buggy stuff that seems to live on forever out there that we're always going to be chasing these things down.
Yeah, we've said it over and over again. Keep systems up to date. As much as anything else, the exploit is one aspect of this. I think the other part of it is that kind of screams at me is this notion that we tend to think of mainstream websites or reputable websites as being okay to visit. And I think that's one of the sort of the fundamentals or the thing that's a little different from the common wisdom here is that it's actually, in this case, a legitimate or presumably well-maintained website that was exploited in this case to help exploit targets and likely for the purpose of stealing information about their activities associated with this organization. So that's a little different. We tend to have thought of malicious sites as malicious websites and the good ones as good ones. It's very difficult to determine how you decide what websites are valid to go to and which ones are not. And this is just a good example of that.
Yeah, well, the other thing this brings to mind is the diligence required by the maintainers of the website to keep on top of have the changes been made to your website, and were they legitimate changes? And sites with constantly changing content, that is even more difficult to do. But when are you able to detect when some bad actor has managed to inject something onto your site? That's a big deal.
Okay. So let's take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so. And this kind of comes up pretty much every year now. We have some observations over the holiday period that, in this particular case, I think is entirely innocuous, but it's interesting nevertheless. What we're noting here is an increase in packet and byte volume on port 16402 UDP. 16402 UDP is used in some peer-to-peer applications like FaceTime, for example. And as we can see here, basically what this graph is showing, by the way, is the difference or the level of change relative to normal that we're seeing. So we're basically comparing activity at a given time with what we'd previously seen to be normal activity. And so what you can see in this graph is basically a change relative to normal. And the largest change was happened to be on December 25th, Christmas Day, and I suspect that this is a lot of folks that have activated their new gizmos that they got for Christmas and are trying out FaceTime or iChat with their friends and neighbors and relatives. So that's my guess here. It hasn't been fully confirmed, but we saw basically an increase in activity on this port subsequent to that time as well, which would be, again, folks probably using that mechanism to extend out to their relatives and friends and over the holidays. So it's always nice to have something to report that doesn't appear to be a security problem, but nevertheless is a change in activity on the network. Next item is an increase in scam probes on port 2967 TCP. This is associated with the Symantec System Center. Basically, it's a management function associated with their antivirus tool. And this is actually not new. This actually is activity that we typically see. It's not unusual to see this at all. What we've been seeing is, one or two addresses scanning on this port from time to time. As you can see from the graph, it's very spiky activity. It will come and go. And the source addresses will vary over time. So we've seen mostly addresses from Asia and the Middle East active, at least recently. But as I said, this activity is fairly typical. Is if we were to go back 90 days, 180 days, or even over the last year or so, you'd see this as being not a significant increase in activity. So I'm not sure why it's actually showed up on the radar here today. I think it may be, in fact, that there are less other events that have tended to push this down in terms of significance. There was an exploit associated with this port from years ago, and I'm thinking back around 2005 or so time frame, that had been used to actually propagate a worm. So there are some opportunities out there still for attackers to take advantage of some vulnerability or get access to these systems. But for the most part, I think it's probably spotty at best.
Yeah, I see these probes hitting our honeypots on a fairly regular basis, still trying to exploit that vulnerability from 7 years ago. Yeah,
so the old things just don't seem to go away, do they, Jim?
No, they don't.
Next item here, this is what showed up in our data is scan packets on port 80 TCP. So this is not actually an increase in the number of probes per se, but it's actually lots of packets from the same source address and actually going to the same destination address. So this is a little different than we typically have seen. Now, when I looked into this a little bit further, well, first of all, there's a single source address that's creating this activity. It started around, I guess, near the beginning of the day on December 28th, and has been fairly consistent since then. It looks like it's probably backscatter from a denial of service attack. That is a spoof source address denial of service attack. And the indicator of this is that the source port in this activity is also fixed on port 80 TCP, and it's consistently SYN-ACK flags associated with this activity. And another thing I didn't make note of here, but an observation is that the address range where we're seeing the activity going to is relatively narrow, which could be an indicator of maybe some source address blocking that's taking place that might be blocking some of that activity from actually propagating. So my conclusion here, or at least belief, is that this is backscatter from a denial of service attack that's taking place and continuing. I'll just taking a quick look at our pie charts here of the most probed ports. These are from yesterday, January 2nd, 2013. No surprises here. They're fairly typical ports: port 445, 1433, port 23, port 3389, and port 22, port 3306, and port 5900. So all of these are ones that we've reported many times as sources of or targets of probing activity, predominantly password guessing attacks against those targets. And we also do see a continuation of that peer-to-peer activity associated with the zero-access botnet. That's this 16,471 UDP as 16,464 UDP that are showing up in this graph. Next item here is those sources that are doing probing. Again, no surprises in this particular set of activity. Again, port 445 TCP, 23 TCP, port 3389 TCP, and we see some other sort of peer-to-peer activity. This is 3074 and 27015. Generally, these are considered not associated with attack activity or not security relevant. And then we are continuing to see the peer-to-peer activity associated with the zero-access botnet. Again, these 16,400 series ports. So with that, relatively shorter program for today. It's been a relatively quiet holiday period. That's a good thing. And, as we said, we talked about earlier, the denial of service attacks against financial organizations are continuing, but our strong opinion is that they're not particularly effective other than what's showing up in the social media. So with that, that's our show for today. If you'd like to contact us, we certainly welcome your feedback. You can contact us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. The video program is available from the AT&T Tech channel. That's att.com/ThreatTraq. It's also available on YouTube. And audio versions are available on iTunes as well as FeedBurner. So thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next week with a new episode, and until then, keep your network safe.